Hello and welcome. You're watching One India News. I'm Amrita Das, and this is Global Chit Chat, our weekly show where we speak about the developments in the geopolitical sphere in the recent week with our expert, Mr. Tridivesh Singh Maini. Hello, sir. Welcome back to our show.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir. So, sir, let's just dive right into it. Something very interesting happening in Odisha. So, the representatives of ASEAN countries, they are here, they were here rather for a 3-day visit. And Naveen Patnaik, the chief minister of the state, he has stressed that, Asian countries and the state in particular should have cultural ties and trade ties, and the ties should be strengthened. So, what can you tell us about the entire meeting and also how the state in particular and also India as a whole will be, affected by this meeting?
Okay. So first of all, just a bit of a background. As we have been discussing, this phenomena of state governments reaching out to other countries. There are various. You can call it. It has been called para-diplomacy by some uh, political scientists. It's been called constituent diplomacy. So it can be understood in various ways. Basically, it's a participation of state governments or in certain countries, provinces. In the case of Germany, they're called landers. Subnational units in foreign policy. So now, specifically, when you look at the Act East, when you look at India's outreach, first look East and then Act East, uh, state governments in different ways, their role has not been highlighted, but they have played a role. So, for instance, you have a large diaspora from South India, especially from Tamil Nadu in Malaysia and in Singapore, right? Then you have historical linkages, you have trade linkages between some South Indian states uh, with ASEAN, then even Eastern India. Now coming specifically to the case of Odisha, uh, Naveen Patnaik basically, this is the meeting with envoys from ASEAN countries was basically to discuss, various potential synergies, and obviously, like many other states, under the umbrella of Make in India, Odisha is also having what is called the Make in Odisha conclave, and the first time it was in 2016. So Indonesia and Australia Odisha, they have historical linkages because you have, for instance, every year around November, you have something called the Bali Yatra, which highlights Odisha's maritime history as well as its connectivity with maritime connectivity, trade routes with Indonesia. Then you have, since the last 5 6 years, there have been exchanges, specific exchanges between Indonesia and, I mean, and apart from at an official level, some dialogues were also held, and there has been talk that enhancing air connectivity and so on. That all has been there. So one is obviously we need to realize that when you look at the Act East policy, sometimes you look at it in terms of land connectivity. You also have other states. Some states could play a role through the diaspora, right? Like I mentioned, South Indian states. Some states in East, like Odisha, which is in Eastern India, obviously that is important in the context of the historical linkages. Now, how do you rekindle those linkages? You could have people to people exchanges, apart from obviously clearer synergies with Indonesia. But even other countries, other ASEAN countries also said that, we would like to strengthen our ties with Odisha. And it's important. So apart from looking at, as I said, the land connectivity, there are other ways also you can obviously bolster the participation of Indian states, especially in the outreach towards ASEAN countries. You have a dialogue, for instance, there's a dialogue, India ASEAN dialogue. Over there, you can get more states on board. Northeastern states are already there, but states like Odisha, for instance, can be part of it. And then also, I think domestically also, if for instance, some states can benefit from an outreach towards ASEAN and get some economic, and I mean that also addresses one of the major challenges, which is regional disparities within India. So Eastern India benefits from that. So I think this whole the thing of competitive federalism in a way is good, and obviously you have outreach. States which earlier did not have an opportunity probably to showcase their potential, they are also beginning to do it. And specifically in the context of ASEAN, I think, as I said, it needs to be more, uh, India's outreach can be more broad based. Soft power, various states can play an important role in the soft power part, as well as other. So, I mean, I'll just highlight one thing, for instance, before we move on to the next. You have very limited direct connectivity with ASEAN countries. Apart from Singapore, Malaysia, and Thailand, you don't have, you hardly have any direct flights. So I think at least those states which have historical linkages, they can start, even if you, the economic linkages don't may not pick up right away, but wherever there are historic linkages, you revive connectivity, you commemorate your linkages, promote tourism specifically. So people from
Yeah.
Indonesia would also be interested in Odisha. So these are interesting starting points. So I think
Hmm.
this event needs to be looked at from a broader perspective of paradiplomacy in India, the role of state governments in the Act East, especially vis-a-vis ASEAN, uh, things like connectivity, air connectivity, how to improve it, things like tourism, and then maybe even other linkages in education and so on. Because obviously, when you have historical linkages, you can build upon that. It can be joint research and so on. So a number of issues, but it's a very interesting development, I think.
Right, right. And also speaking about South Asian countries, let's come to China. China is seeing a massive toll in its economy, like we've already been discussing for the past few weeks. But also, it has again decided to lock down millions of its citizens because before the winter is coming and before the winter arrives, and there have been visuals where we see that there was just this one iPhone plant in China where people were literally escaping from the plant before the plant was locked down. So what do you think is going to happen, because Xi Jinping has started his third term, and do you think the Xi Jinping regime can actually resist or counter these problems, because not just the economy, the people of China have also started protesting against it, which is a rare occurrence in China to protest against the government. So they have also started protesting, and now they were seen visibly escaping from a plant. So what do you think is going to happen? Can the Xi Jinping regime put up with this?
So basically, this was basically it is a Foxconn plant in Shenzhou, which is a capital of Henan province. Now, so over there, obviously, as a result of the restrictions, COVID restrictions, over the past few days, the restrictions have been increasing. First, they weren't allowed to get out, because
Yeah.
obviously first they've been relaxed, then they could go to restaurants and so on and so forth. And so gradually, the restrictions have been increasing in recent years. And then you saw, so this is two things. This one, it raises questions about, again, what we've been talking about, the zero COVID policy, that whether it's sustainable and feasible or not. The other is automatically, through these curbs, you're going to see a major drop in a contraction in the production of Apple iPhones specifically. And this obviously, since there are global supply chains involved and all, it will have an impact that way also. But I think in terms of the domestic economy, it will have serious issues. And again, I mean, we come back to the same point, that whether uh, you know these, so for instance, whether Apple will now look at, already it has diversified. Of course, that is something which happens in the long run. It can't happen overnight, but it depends upon whether also, it will also be interesting to see how does Xi Jinping respond to international reactions to, because obviously there's concern, and you have a lot of expats also in China, who are worried, who are concerned. And uh, because no other country has had such stringent policies to deal with COVID-19. So firstly, it's obviously production in the short run, impact on the Chinese economy, impact on supply chains, and what is the end game for this? Because if you don't have any herd immunity, you go every time you have cases, you go to lockdown. So then that is problematic. So it's multiple issues, and it obviously shows that while there was some expectation that there may be some course corrections, but essentially Xi Jinping is carrying on with the same policies.
Yes, granting the fact that the variants that are popping up at the moment, they are not as deadly. So why do you think China is still taking this stance? Why are they not, kind of letting go a little bit? Do you think there is space to let go a little bit in that in?
See, I think basically, even if the variants are not, I think there is very, unlike other countries where they opened up, there was a sort of herd immunity. Opened up not only domestically, opened up to tourists. So there was herd immunity. And now there is a downside that when you open up too much, initially you could have new way. But obviously countries went ahead with that. Now, China had probably set up a very stringent, I mean, this objective about having, zero COVID is not easy to achieve. So once you stick to that, changing that is problematic. But it also depends upon how already domestically there is the opposition is, I mean, from various people, from ordinary citizens. Now that is visible. And as we have been discussing earlier, if economic issues, economic challenges also rise further, then you have multiple challenges to deal with. Even though politically maybe very strong at this point of time, these issues cannot be avoided because after all, the slowdown in the economy, these restrictions of this sort, they impact everybody in some way. And there's a certain point where people want an opening up. So this could be a major challenge for China,
Right.
not just in the next few months, but over the longer term. And at what stage will China actually take a call that, okay, now we can open up and now let's start building herd immunity? Because
Right.
always just lockdown, or you can't, you can't keep on having this vaccination also. So
Yes.
there has to be some end game to it.
Yes, it is an infinite loop right now in that country, I must say. Next we come to the Middle East. So Saudi Arabia and UAE, they have jointly defended a decision taken by the OPEC and its allies that there should be a major cut down in oil export. The American envoy, they have also warned of an uncertainty in the economy. So can you just elaborate the economic uncertainty that America is speaking about in this scenario, or what is going on in there?
So I think there was an event at Abu Dhabi where you had the energy ministers from Saudi Arabia, from UAE, and obviously had a US presence also over there. So essentially, if very interesting to see, while Saudi Arabia said that it had to watch out for its own interest and of other members, of OPEC plus, UAE said that at any point of time they would be ready, to raise. I mean, OPEC plus countries would be ready to raise oil production as and when necessary. So there is a bit of, if you look at the tone and tenor of the UAE and Saudi Arabia, probably we've alluded to this in the past, that UAE is also changing its foreign policy, trying to move a bit away from the US, to reduce its dependence, but in a very subtle sort of manner with a balancing act, right? Now, at this point of time, this is more about, obviously, there is at this point of time, it's about oil shortages, the oil market, and all that. But essentially, Saudi Arabia is also it's a long term over. It's been happening over a long term that Saudi Arabia has been looking at alternatives. Saudi Arabia has also been distancing itself from the US. So that angle, especially the first few months of the Biden administration, and how the dealt with somehow Saudi Arabia has not gotten over that, and obviously Saudi Arabia also realizes that the if you look at the Middle East, the changes which are taking place over there, and now I think also, in fact, Xi Jinping is going to be visiting Saudi Arabia, and he's going to be having a summit with leaders from other Gulf countries. So both Saudi Arabia and UAE have been moving closer. Not just, I mean, at this point of time, if you look at OPEC plus, the US is saying that these countries are trying to favor Russia, but they have also been moving closer to China. So and so a bit of it is the changing geopolitics, the changing realities. A bit of it is also posturing, because now obviously the US is not going to actually. There were calls for taking tougher measures and so on and so forth vis-a-vis Saudi Arabia. No such thing has happened. The US has expressed concern again about this decision, that what impact would it have, over the global oil markets. But I think a lot of it is posturing, and some part of it is the changing geopolitics. And you have a number of countries actually which have probably sensed, not just the Middle East, even outside, which are very close to the US, but have distanced themselves on certain issues and certain things. So you're seeing that at this point of time. But the US is also trying to look at, US is also looking at alternatives to, for oil. And in fact, Biden has been criticized also. The Republicans have criticized him that why not so much focus was laid on, the domestic production of ramping that up. All those criticisms have been there. But I think both sides will need to, there are certain compulsions as well. And they will need to find out some sort of happy medium whereby, maybe let's say through Saudi Arabia and UAE, uh, OPEC Plus agrees to some extent to increase its oil production, and in return, Saudi Arabia especially could get some, not concessions, but get the US, for instance, to change its stance on certain issues or whatever. Though I might mention that in any case, even though Biden has been critical of MBS, they didn't impose sanctions, so they had stopped
Right.
short of imposing sanctions, while other Saudi officials were sanctioned. So, well, what are the issues which can be brought in over? I mean, that will need to be seen. And but US has now very limited options, because as it is, I mean, even with Iran, the nuclear deal is not, there is no sign of survival of that. Tensions are increasing even over there, and with these problems with UAE and Saudi Arabia, I think the challenges have increased, because in the past you could at least depend upon either.
Yeah.
Right now, that is a major problem. So,
Right.
very the complex. Obviously, in the short term, it's about economics, or about, but the geopolitical developments over a period of time, which have resulted in what is happening now.
Right, right. So thank you so much for all the information that you've given us today, and also thank you everybody for watching One India News. Catch us again in the next week on Global Chit Chat. Thank you for watching.